There's something strange about the habits you've carried your whole life. Not the dramatic ones. Not the ones people warn you about. The quiet ones. The ones that feel so natural you'd never think to question them. The ones that feel like you. You laugh when something makes you uncomfortable. Not because it's funny, but because something inside you learned a long time ago that being too serious was dangerous. That showing you were bothered invited something worse. And you don't even notice you're doing it anymore. Or maybe you apologize, constantly, for existing too loudly, for taking up space, for having a need at all. You say sorry before you even know what you're sorry for. And there's this low hum underneath it, this feeling like your presence is already, somehow, too much. That hum didn't start yesterday. There are things living inside you that you built before you had words for them. Patterns you assembled in the dark, not because you were broken, but because you were trying to survive something. Something that, to a child, felt like the whole world. And here's what no one tells you. Those patterns didn't disappear when you grew up. They became you, or at least they became what you believe is you. Think about how you respond when someone gets close, really close. Not physically, but emotionally. When someone sees you or tries to, is there a part of you that pulls back? That finds a reason to create distance? That suddenly gets very busy, or very unavailable, or very funny again? That's not coldness. That's a child who learned that closeness was unpredictable, that love came and went without warning, that staying slightly untouchable was safer than being seen and then abandoned. And what's remarkable and painful about that particular pattern is how invisible it is. Because you're not mean. You're not distant in a way people can easily name. You show up. You care, you're present. But there's a wall they can never quite find the door to. And sometimes, in the quiet, you feel it too. You feel the distance even from yourself. Like you're watching your own life through glass, never fully inside it. That feeling has a name, but it wasn't born in adulthood. And it shows up in the strangest places. In the middle of a dinner with people who love you, where everything is technically fine, and yet there's this low-level awareness that you are slightly performing, slightly managing, slightly curating which version of yourself is safe to show. You smile at the right times, you say the right things, and nobody notices because you've been doing this so long it looks completely natural. But you notice. You notice that you left the dinner feeling tired in a way that has nothing to do with the hour. If you've ever felt this, stay here. This is for you. And then there's the hypervigilance. The way you read rooms. The way you can feel a shift in someone's tone before they even finish their sentence. The way you're always scanning for what's coming next. People call it intuition. They tell you you're perceptive, emotionally intelligent. And maybe you are, but the origin of that perception might not be a gift. It might be what happens to a nervous system that spent years needing to predict someone else's mood to feel safe. That learned to read the air because the air was sometimes dangerous. You learned to notice when the energy in a room changed, when a door closed a little too hard, when the silence at the dinner table was a different kind of silence than the night before. You became fluent in subtext, in body language, in the tiny signals that told you whether it was safe to breathe normally or whether you needed to make yourself smaller, quieter, less of whatever you were being. That's not a superpower you were born with. That's a child who had to become a forecaster just to survive the weather. And here's the thing about growing up hypervigilant: you don't stop when the storm passes. You can't, because the nervous system doesn't know the storm is over. It keeps watching. It keeps scanning. It keeps waiting for the shift it learned very early to expect. So you find yourself exhausted in ways you can't explain, tired after conversations that were fine, drained by environments that were perfectly safe. You wonder why you can never fully relax, why there's always this low-level hum of alertness that follows you into the quietest rooms of your life. It's because some part of you is still standing guard, still protecting a child who doesn't need protecting anymore. But no one told that part of you it could finally rest. There's also something that happens to your relationship with conflict. Not big, explosive conflict, but the everyday kind. The kind where someone is slightly short with you, or a plan changes without warning, or someone doesn't respond the way you expected. Most people feel a flicker of irritation and move on. But for you, it can land differently. Heavier, like it means something more than it should. Like it's evidence of something. And maybe, without fully realizing it, you've organized your entire life around avoiding that feeling. Around being agreeable enough, accommodating enough, easy enough to be around, that conflict never gets a reason to appear. You became someone who keeps the peace because peace once wasn't guaranteed. If this channel speaks to something real in you, something you've never quite had words for, consider subscribing. You're not the only one asking these questions. Here's the one that's hardest to see. The need to be needed. The way you feel most secure when someone depends on you. When you're the helper, the fixer, the one who holds it all together. And how, underneath that, there's this terrifying thought you almost never let yourself finish. What happens if I'm not useful anymore? Do I still get to stay? That fear is old. It was built in a time when your value felt conditional. When love felt like something you had to earn through service, through being good, through making yourself small enough, or helpful enough, or invisible enough, that the people around you wouldn't leave. You never decided to believe that about yourself. It was decided for you, before you knew what belief was. And the cruel irony of this particular pattern is that it looks like love from the outside. People see you as generous, selfless, always there, and you are. But if you sit with the honesty of it, really sit with it, you might notice that your giving has a shadow. That underneath the warmth, there's anxiety. That you don't help purely from abundance. Sometimes you help from fear. From the quiet, relentless terror that if you stop, if you rest, if you need something for yourself, the whole structure of belonging you've carefully built will collapse. That's an enormous weight to carry. And it's especially heavy because no one sees it. Because from the outside, you look fine, you look strong. You look like the person who has it together. And so no one thinks to ask how you are, because you're the one who usually does the asking. And then there's the perfectionism that doesn't feel like perfectionism, because it's not about achievement. It's about safety. It's the way you replay conversations for hours. The way a small mistake can turn into a spiral. The way I did something wrong so quickly becomes, I am something wrong. That leap from action to identity, that's not logic, that's shame. Installed early, running quietly in the background. And shame, unlike guilt, doesn't say I did something bad. It says I am something bad. And that distinction is enormous. Because guilt can move, you can make it right, apologize, learn, adjust. It becomes the lens. And when you see yourself through it long enough, you stop questioning whether the lens is accurate. You just assume it is. You assume that the critical voice in your head is telling the truth. That it's protection, not punishment. That if you stay hard on yourself, you'll never be caught off guard by someone else's disappointment. But who taught that voice to speak? Whose disappointment were you originally preparing for? And here's something worth asking yourself, not to dig up pain, but to begin to understand the architecture of it. When did you first learn that who you naturally were wasn't quite right? Was it something that was said? Something that was never said? An absence where warmth should have been? A presence that was too unpredictable to trust? You probably can't point to a single moment. And that's part of what makes this so disorienting, because childhood trauma doesn't always arrive as a single dramatic event. Sometimes it arrives as a pattern, as years of small moments that added up, as a household where love was real but conditional, as a parent who was present but emotionally unavailable, as a childhood that looked fine from the outside but felt uncertain from the inside. And the mind of a child, working with what it has, concluded something. Quietly, without drama, without even realizing it was constructing a belief system that would run for decades. Leave a comment below. Which of these felt the most familiar? You might be surprised how many people are carrying the exact same thing in silence. Carl Rogers once wrote that the deepest form of human suffering is to be estranged from yourself. Not from others, from yourself. To live inside a version of you that was constructed to survive an environment that no longer exists. You are not your survival strategies. And yet, and this is the part that takes time to really absorb, you can't hate them either. Because they were never the enemy. Every single pattern we've talked about was once a solution. A brilliant, improvised, deeply human solution to something that felt impossible. The humor that deflects, it kept you light when lightness was survival. The apologizing, it smoothed the edges of situations that could have become dangerous. The emotional scanning, it kept you one step ahead of unpredictability. The need to be needed, it gave you a role, a reason to belong, a sense that your presence made sense in the room. The shame and perfectionism, they were armor. Imperfect, painful armor, but armor nonetheless. You built all of this, not because you were weak, because you were resourceful beyond what any child should have needed to be. Here's where something shifts. The moment you can look at a habit, not with judgment, but with curiosity, and ask, where did this come from? Something inside begins to loosen, not break, not disappear, loosen. Because that pattern, whatever it is, the laughing, the apologizing, the hypervigilance, the needing to be needed, the shame spiraling, it was never a flaw, it was intelligence. It was a small person doing the most reasonable thing they could with the information they had. And the question that changes everything, the one worth sitting with, is this still true? Is the environment you're responding to still dangerous? Is the person you're protecting yourself from still in the room? Is the threat real, or is it a memory your body hasn't finished grieving? Because sometimes the most honest answer is no. The environment changed, the people changed, the danger passed, but the response stayed. And you've been walking through open fields as if they were still minefields, not out of stupidity, but out of loyalty to a self that needed that caution to survive. There's something profound in that realization. Something that can feel like grief before it feels like relief. Because when you start to see that your patterns were adaptations, not character flaws, you also have to grieve the years you spent believing they were who you were. The relationships that suffered because of walls you didn't know how to lower. The opportunities you didn't take because the shame said you weren't ready, weren't enough, weren't worth the risk. That grief is real. Let it be real, but grief is not the end of the story. And now you're older. And the information has changed. You don't have to keep responding to a threat that isn't there anymore. That doesn't mean healing is easy. It doesn't mean you just decide to stop. The nervous system doesn't update like software. Change is slow. It's non-linear. It looks like recognizing the pattern after it happens, then recognizing it while it happens, then, eventually, gently, having a breath of space before it arrives. That space, that single breath of space, is not a small thing. It's the whole thing. Because in that space, you are no longer the pattern. You are the one who notices the pattern. And that distance, however thin at first, is the beginning of a self that is larger than its wounds. A self that can hold the old responses with compassion without being completely governed by them. That's not a transformation that happens in a weekend retreat or a revelation at 3 a.m. It's quiet. It accumulates. It shows up in the moment you feel yourself about to laugh off something that hurt, and you pause, and you say, even just internally, that actually bothered me, and you let it bother you. And the world doesn't end. It shows up in the moment you're about to apologize for asking the completely reasonable question, and you catch it. And you just ask the question. It shows up when someone gets close, and instead of finding a reason to pull back, you feel the fear, the old, familiar fear, and you stay anyway. Not because the fear disappeared, but because you're no longer convinced that the fear is telling the truth. These are small moments. But small moments, accumulated over time, are what a life is made of. Rogers also believed something else. something that felt almost radical for its time, and somehow still does. He believed that when a person is given the conditions of genuine acceptance, unconditional positive regard, and safety to explore their own experience, they move, naturally and inevitably, toward growth, toward wholeness, not because they're forced to, not because someone fixed them, but because that's what human beings do when they're finally allowed to be human. You are still moving. Even now. Even in the middle of whatever season you're in, the confusion, the exhaustion, the half-healing, you are still moving towards something truer. And the fact that you're here, watching this, sitting with these questions instead of scrolling past them, that means something. It means the part of you that wants to understand itself is louder than the part that wants to stay hidden. And that's not a small thing. That's actually everything. Most people never get here. Not because they're incapable, but because looking honestly at your own patterns requires a kind of courage that isn't celebrated enough. It's not the courage of doing something brave in front of others. It's the quieter, harder courage of being willing to sit alone with something uncomfortable and not immediately run from it. You're doing that right now. That's worth recognizing. That's worth staying for. If this video reached something in you, please like it and share it. Someone in your life might need to hear exactly this. You've spent a long time being normal. But normal was just the name you gave to things you never thought to question. The laughing, the apologizing, the watching the room, the giving until you disappear. The voice that says you're never quite enough. None of it was random. All of it made sense. All of it was yours, earned in ways no child should have to earn anything. And maybe the most important thing isn't to fix any of it quickly, but to finally see it. To sit with the recognition that the patterns you've been living inside were built to protect something tender and real. Not something broken. Something tender. Something that needed protection because it was worth protecting. And that something is still in there. It never left. It got quieter maybe. It got covered over with strategy and armor and the particular exhaustion of always being on. But underneath all of it, underneath the habits you thought were just who you are, there is still a person who wants to be known. Who wants to stop performing safety and start actually feeling it. Who is ready, slowly, imperfectly, on their own timeline, to come home to themselves. Still waiting. Still worth knowing.